What's up, everybody? This is Andrew Erickson here from the Full Press Coverage Fantasy Football Podcast. This is the second time I'm recording because I messed up the first time. But we're back here again. I'm doing my 32 teams in 32 days. And today I'm actually going to be focusing on two different teams. So starting with the Baltimore Ravens, as you can see here. Oh, there goes my hand. Oh, there it comes back. All right, Joe Flacco right over there, my dude. You know, he is elite. No, that joke has just gone way too long. So we got Joe Flacco here. We're in the Ravens locker room. I got to talk to him a little bit. I asked him about Lamar Jackson and you feeling the pressure, and he was like, nah, man, I'm Joe Cool. I'm elite, man. I'm Joe Cool. So Joe Flacco is not feeling the heat apparently from Lamar Jackson, but we'll see if that changes his production on the field. Most of the time with these older quarterbacks, for the most part, they pretty much stay the same in terms of their production, and Flacco's basically kind of been on a steady decline since signing his contract. But there is something different this year, that they have a backup quarterback that's pushing him. They drafted him in the first round, and the Ravens did that because they get the fifth-year option, so it's just another year that they can evaluate that quarterback position. So it makes sense that this could be possibly Joe Flacco's last year as a Baltimore Raven. The Ravens would save $10 million if they cut him at the beginning of next season. So this could be the end of Joe Flacco for us. The end of an era, I guess, would be the best way to put it. But we'll see if he can, duplicate what Alex Smith did last year in terms of, pretty much useless his whole career, and then finally kind of gets it going, when someone gets drafted in the back of him. So I do expect Joe Flacco to improve at least a little bit from what his career averages are. I'm not saying he'll have a career year, but I do think he's, in line to have a better season than he was last year. The Ravens' offensive line is much healthier than it was a season ago. Flacco himself is more healthy. He was coming off major back surgery, and even the second half of last season, his numbers were a little bit better than they were in the year, the first half of the year. I'm not saying that he was going to win MVP or he's going to be great or finish in the top five top five quarterbacks, but I do expect more from Joe Flacco, and I also then expect more from his receivers. So guys like Michael Crabtree, I think, is locked in as a wide receiver 2. The best receiver that's ever finished with Joe Flacco had finished wide receiver 15. So I don't think Crabtree or anybody on the Ravens offense has a wide receiver 1 upside. I don't think a wide receiver 1 can basically coexist in a Joe Flacco ecosystem of a passing game. But I do think that Michael Crabtree is definitely locked in as at least a top 24 wide receiver. I would say more in the 17 to 20 range, so kind of that mid-range wide receiver 2. I think he'll put up big, consistent weeks. He will be a red zone guy, so I do like Michael Crabtree at his draft value. I think he's a solid pick, basically kind of wherever you can get him. At 31 years old, I think he's still got a lot left in the tank, and we've seen this before. Crabtree's not necessarily a speed guy, but we've seen this, if he decide to work over the middle, work on the outside, Flacco kind of goes towards those guys, those Anquan Bolden type players, the Derek Masons. Flacco's, worked with a lot of older receivers and has actually had a lot of success. It's actually been more or less younger receivers that Flacco has kind of struggled to develop chemistry with, besides with Torrey Smith really earlier on in his career. The other two receivers, Willie Snead and John Brown. John Brown's kind of playing that outside receiver role, and we know John Brown's a good player, but at this point, he's not healthy. He's got that sickle cell thing. He's had quad, hamstring, all the injuries. I did a lot of coverage for Full Press on the Cardinals last year, and John Brown was a guy he flashes, and then he just is hurt, and then that's kind of it with him. So, and then you got Willie Snead. So, Flacco last year actually, part of what he does most effectively is the short middle of the field is kind of where he has the majority of his targets. He literally will pass the ball short middle of the field constantly. So usually that's to his tight ends, but in this case it could be to Willie Snead. So look at Willie Snead as kind of a very deep sleeper in terms of a guy that can get a lot of steady production, especially in PPR leagues. I do think Willie Snead has some value in the Ravens offense, especially with the two tight ends being rookie tight ends, which we usually don't see them break out too early, at least in their rookie season. So I'm not super high on either tight end necessarily, even though Flacco has targeted tight ends. More or less he's targeted the middle of the field, which in this case I think would go to more guys like Crabtree and guys like Willie Snead, not necessarily rookie tight ends that aren't necessarily the best in that situation. That being said, I also think that the Ravens are going to run the ball more effectively with Alex Collins. Alex Collins last year finished as the ADP, average depth position. Yeah, that makes sense. He finished as the RB16 in standard half-point PPR fantasy football drafts. So what we can expect from Alex Collins is, he's going to be the starter from day one. I'm very convinced that they're going to give him more work, especially even in the passing game. Buck Allen is still there, so I think that's a guy he will kind of compete with touches on third down. Besides that, though, I don't think Kenneth Dixon has it in him to really merge. He's dealt with suspensions. He's dealing with injuries again. And Alex Collins really did save kind of their team a little bit last year. Even though they didn't end up making it very far, the Ravens did improve, once they started to be able to run the football, and that was through Alex Collins. So Alex Collins, graded out very well by Pro Football Focus. He was put in conversations with Ezekiel Elliott, Todd Gurley. So, and if you look at their schedule, it's very, very soft in terms of their run opponents, their defenses that they will face against the run. Ravens have a very favorable approach with that, and Alex Collins has a very good schedule. So I do think I like Alex Collins. As an RB2, I think that he's a great pick. I would take him over guys like Derrick Henry, Kenyon Drake, Jay Ajayi. So he's kind of going in that range, and I personally would take Alex Collins over all those guys. I think he's just a better player in terms of what we saw with him last year, and I think he's got a good opportunity. He's got the volume. He doesn't have a lot of really other backs to compete with, and I do think that we're going to see improvements from the Ravens offense as a whole. So that's kind of what, with the Ravens specifically, looking additionally at their depth chart here as well. Let's see. So, like I said, Willie Snead, Michael Crabtree, John Brown, Rashad Perryman. How the mighty have fallen, but it doesn't really count as mighty because he never really was good. Again, it just seems like Flacco cannot consistently get younger receivers to really mesh or become things. Quincy Abadaji, don't know how to pronounce his name. Abby not going to be here, so not important. Nick Boyle, he's blocking tight end. That's the thing back to the tight ends. Whoever can block is going to play. And Mark Andrews can't block. He is a basically receiver, out of Oklahoma, bona fide receiver. And then Hayden Hurst is obviously an interesting prospect. They took him pretty early on, but they've taken a lot of tight ends early on. Max Williams, for example. So I'm not super convinced yet. And so, yeah, that's kind of my analysis there on the Baltimore Ravens. Not as much, as the other teams in terms of fantasy guys, but there are a couple pieces here and there. I would say that if you're looking for someone cheap, I guess Buck Allen would be a guy. He did score, if you look at his numbers from last year, he's actually pretty good in terms of his overall finishes. Obviously, he was mixing in work, but he had a lot of big role in the passing game. So if there's a chance that Alex Collins just remains the first and second down back, Javorius Allen, Buck Allen, who's actually played pretty well as that pass catching back, is a guy you can buy pretty cheap, in dynasty leagues, something I did. So I do think that he's a guy that you can kind of target later in drafts as well as a kind of a space back type of player. And now we'll move on to the second team on my 32 teams on this specific episode because, the more the merrier. And I do honestly, to be totally honest with you guys, I didn't want to spend an entire episode talking about the one and only Buffalo Bills. So we are in Buffalo. Woo! Authorized personnel only. Yeah, because it is freezing here. Even though it's summertime, it's still cold. So we are here in Buffalo, and I just got a chance to talk to Corey Coleman. He is he's so excited to be here. He said, I'm so blessed that the Cleveland Browns decided to trade me over to the Bills for a 7th round pick. I feel very happy, and I'm just blessed for this opportunity to really show them what I can do. That's not actually what he said at all. I actually read a report that it looked like he was contemplating not showing up at all and basically being like, yeah, I think I'm not going to play football at all. I think I'd rather just not be in the NFL than play for the Bills. I mean, come on, it can't be that bad. Suck it up. So the Buffalo Bills, basically everybody's favorite fantasy wasteland trivia question. Who was the last wide receiver to finish as a wide receiver 1 on the Buffalo Bills? Take your time and try to think it over. I'll answer it at the end of the podcast, at the end of the episode. But think about it. The last, not even wide receiver one, top 10 wide receiver. Who was the last Bills wide receiver to finish in the top 10 in fantasy football? Think about that. And you don't need to go back. It happened within, this millennium, this decade. Yes, this decade. Just barely, but there's a couple hints right there for you. So looking at the Bills depth chart, looking at the Bills offense, got Josh Allen, AJ McCarron. So two unproven quarterbacks for the most part. McCarron did play pretty well from what I remember when he played in for Andy Dalton, and then he got, injured. Or no, he didn't get injured. Andy Dalton came back. It was just a whole mess. That was the year the Bengals actually were pretty good. And they actually kind of had like a Derek Carr, similar Oakland Raiders situation last year where everything was kind of going in their favor and their quarterback got hurt and then just like Cleveland Browns style. So we've got some questions at quarterback. You're not going to be picking any of these guys, in drafts right now. Dynasty, Josh Allen is an interesting prospect, but he's going super late. But for me, I'm not a huge Josh Allen guy. Most people aren't, but. And then you got Kelvin Benjamin, who thinks it's okay to, talk smack to his old quarterback who's not accurate when he realizes that Josh Allen is his new quarterback who is, spoiler alert, not accurate. So Kelvin Benjamin, I'm not really sure what he's doing, what his whole plan is being. Part of me just really wants him to shift over to tight end. I just want the Bills to run two tight end sets, Kelvin Benjamin, Charles Clay, LeSean McCoy, and just push the ball down the field, run it every single play. And speaking of that, so Kelvin Benjamin, he's still really young. That's the thing. He's a young player, but he doesn't have speed. So he's going to be a red zone guy. He's not going to be a guy that you can just break away. Because that's a really way to get easy fantasy points with some of these late round receivers. You essentially get guys that can go deep, that just need one completion that they can take to the house. Like Deshaun Jackson types of players. But Kelvin Benjamin's not really like that. He's more of a red zone guy, so he needs those touches specifically. I do expect him to be more than he was last year, and considering where he's going, he does have value. So I don't have any problems with drafting Kelvin Benjamin. I don't think that he's going to necessarily win your weeks. And the big thing, too, is Buffalo is a barren place for wide receivers. Basically, it's where fantasy wide receivers go to die, essentially, which is where Corey Coleman is. Good for him. But part of the reason is actually a lot to do with the weather. Later in the year, and if you guys remember last year, that snow game where there was no offensive passing at all, that's something that can negatively affect your fantasy team. So that's also why those receivers don't really finish that well overall. It's because of the weather and how cold it is. Obviously, it's in the beginning of the season, so it's not as big as a deal right now. But it's something to keep in mind, as long-term, fantasy playoffs are in that time. The last thing you want is a receiver from the Bills as your, number one, a guy you have to start in the playoff championship match, and it's in a blizzard. That's less than ideal. So Kelvin Benjamin, I'm not crazy about him, but I think he's a guy that you can target. I prefer, if you're going to have a share of the Bills' offense, I do think that Charles Clay is a better option. We've already seen him be productive as a tight end when he's been healthy, and he's a guy that, has been steady. He's not a flashy player, but he steadily puts up, he gets his yards, gets his touches, and last year when he had the opportunity, he really was that go-to guy for Tyrod Taylor. So there's no reason he can't be a go-to guy for Josh Allen or AJ McCarron, and I do like Charles Clay for that specific reason. Chucky Clay, baby, all day. Charles Clay used to play fullback. He used to play fullback for the Miami Dolphins, and now he plays tight end. So, just a fun fact for you. Then going to the running back position, we've got your boy, the one and only Shady McCoy. Shady McCoy. I don't know how he doesn't fumble the ball all the time because he holds the ball like it's not valuable to him. He holds it opposite. He holds it like Sony Michel, who, we'll talk about later because he's, Rex Burkhead season. But, so LeSean McCoy, a lot of people are down on him. They're saying, he's old, he's doing off the field stuff, which I don't know if that's true or not. He hasn't been suspended yet, but I would take it as an opportunity to buy him low, get him lower. I mean, I've seen him going 5th round sometimes. I think that's crazy because I'm taking him. I would take him in the 3rd round for sure. He's gonna get the volume. Volume is king in fantasy football. I don't get why people are going away from this concept. It's always been like that. It's always going to be like that, especially at the running back position. So like, oh well, he can't like. No, like he is a very, very good running back. He has not shown any signs of slowing down. And for those that say, okay, yes, yards per carry was down. All right, well, his yards per carry went down last year too. Was Le'Veon Bell, and we're drafting him 3rd overall. So obviously it doesn't matter that much. It matters for some players. Oh, because LeSean McCoy is 30 and Le'Veon Bell's 28 or 26 or whatever age he is. Like he's gonna get the volume. That's the biggest thing. And the thing that they're saying his efficiency went down last year, but the thing that went up was his receptions. So even if he's not effective as a running back, as a runner, he's still being involved in the passing game, which will make up for those lost in rushing efficiency. Because we all know that a rushing attempt or a rush versus a target or reception, those are worth more. You can get more yards per catch than you can get per rush. It's just a fact. So that's why you should not be fading McCoy. You should not be fading the shade. You should be wanting to go into the shade because it's nice and cool. It's going to be in Buffalo. Go with Shady. Roll with him this season. I'm going to be rolling with him. I actually need to keep a new keeper. I have a keeper situation. I got LeSean McCoy, McCaffrey, and A.J. Green. I got to pick 2. So we'll see what happens there. But I'm on the Shady McCoy train. I think that you guys should be as well. I think you can get him for a very cheap value, even in like a dynasty league. I don't have many shares of him, but I'm considering making a move for him, depending if I can get him for the right price. I want to get him for cheap, but it may be, I get him later on in the season. But I do like LeSean McCoy for his value this season. In terms of the other, Bills players, we've got a whole slew of them here, so let's see what we got. Corey Coleman, of course. He's irrelevant to me. I mean, the dude couldn't get on the field in Cleveland, and when he did, he just dropped the ball, and he's going to basically a fantasy wasteland that's just the Buffalo Bills offense. So, I mean, it sucks because, you see guys like this, and you're like, oh, well, maybe if he'd gone to a good team in the first place, this wouldn't have happened, and vice versa with other players. But, I mean, you don't get to pick the teams to pick you. Maybe you shouldn't have been so good in college. You got picked by a better team. I guess that's your fault. So, right now, starting the opposite of Kelvin Benjamin is Andre Holmes, who is kind of just another guy. Rod Streeter, Jeremy Curley, who's second round. This is his second time in Buffalo. Malik Dupree, Brandon Riley, Kaylee Clay, Zay Jones. Oh my God, Zay Jones. Ugh, this is another guy who's just like, what are you doing? Like, him and, oh God, some of these NFL players, man, just like, you wonder what they're doing. I mean, I don't know. I talk about fake football all the time, so I guess they can say the same thing about me. But, I mean, if I had an opportunity, get somewhere else, I wouldn't be doing stupid stuff like kicking windows and I don't know. But Zay Jones seems to be falling out of favor significantly. He is an interesting candidate to buy in Dynasty. You could probably definitely get him for a 3rd-round pick. So, I mean, if you have 3rd-round picks, I think it's actually worth it to go and try to trade for Zay Jones and just because you'll definitely be able to get him. I can't imagine anyone's like, no, I'm holding on to him. And realistically, it was one season and he underperformed, but things can change. This is what happens, with receivers. Pretty often their value drops after their first year, and that's when you go and buy them. Most rookies don't break out their first season as a wide receiver, especially in Buffalo. But considering that Coleman was traded for they traded a 7th-round pick, so you don't know how much they're invested in Corey Coleman, but I don't think that really bodes well for Zay Jones that they traded for Corey Coleman. I mean, they traded a 7th-round pick, so it could not mean anything, but it's just, for the most part, this Bills situation is a place to avoid. I mean, Kelvin Benjamin, if you get him late, go with him. But I like Charles Clay, and I like LeSean McCoy. And, yeah, with Benjamin's, he's okay. But you can get him for late value. So, hopefully Benjamin can help you start rolling in the Benjamins. DFS. It's a DFS play. You got to do the Benjamin stack. Benjamin stack, Thomas stack. You just got to match all the names. It works. Trust me. So, that is going to do it for today's podcast. We know we covered the Ravens, my boy Joe Flacco. We covered the Bills with my boy Shady McCoy here. And then the fact to my trivia question that I proposed at the beginning of the podcast was, who was the last wide receiver to finish top 10 in the Buffalo Bills offense? Ding, 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 ding. And the answer is, do you guys know it? Why so serious? Stevie Johnson did it in 2010, where Stevie Johnson finished as the wide receiver 10 overall in fantasy football. So that's going to do it for me today, guys. I won't be back tomorrow because I'm doing 2 episodes, 2 teams. So I'll do pick up again on Friday, where I will be dropping another podcast for some more teams. I'm not sure which teams yet. I'm going in alphabetical order. So if there's any other teams that start with the B, I think it's the Bengals that are coming up next. So we get to talk about my favorite dude, Marvin Lewis, AJ Green, Joe Mixon. So a bunch of things to cover, and we got preseason football on, so I'll be talking about that as well. So things are heating up here as the season gets along. So please reach out at Andrew Erickson _ on Twitter. Full Press Coverage Fantasy Football Podcast. Let's go. Woo!